Hello, my name is Ari Kotler, and I am the host of Different on Sleepy Hollow Radio. On this show, you are introduced to incredible people who have overcome profound challenges in order to become successful. In this installment of Different, my guest is the amazing Miss Liz Weintraub. Miss Liz Weintraub lives and works in Maryland and is a senior advocacy specialist at the Association of University Centers on Disabilities. She hosts her own show, which is entitled Tuesdays with Liz. On her show, Tuesdays with Liz, she interviews people involved in policy making and advocacy. She has interviewed Chris Van Hollen, Bob Casey, Pete Sessions, Tom Wheeler, and many more high-profile individuals. In 2011, President Barack Obama appointed Miss Weintraub to serve on his committee for people with intellectual disabilities. Miss Weintraub is also a former chairperson of the Maryland Developmental Disabilities Council. Miss Weintraub has expanded the rights of people with different abilities, and it is a complete honor for me to have Liz as my guest today. Liz, hello and welcome, and thank you so much for appearing on my show.
Thank you, Ari. It's quite a big honor for me to be part of your show, and I would also say that I don't consider myself an amazing advocate, although people have said that, so I understand why you might think that, because people have shared that. But I'm just doing my job, and I love doing what I do, which is helping people speak up for themselves.
Wow, I'm so honored to have you too, and I am so touched to hear that. Miss Weintraub, before we begin, I would like to point out something unique that you do before your interviews. You provide a description of yourself, and I suspect I know the reason, but may I clarify why you do this?
Yes, I do it, and we just started doing this recently, I would say within the last 2 or 3 years. And shame on us that we didn't start sooner, but we didn't. But the reason is because people who it wasn't accessible to everyone, and all means all. One of my favorite saying is all means all, and people who can't see or have other visual disabilities can't see who I am or who you are. So that therefore we need to help people, our friends, to understand who you are and who I am and who other guests are.
I totally agree that all means all, and I think that our school is starting to recognize that, and I think schools across the country are starting to recognize that. I think a lot of organizations are. Do you know how it's been changing for organizations? Do you think organizations are starting to recognize that statement?
It's a very slow process, like anything. It's very slow. Although I think that we're making some progress in the all means all. Take, for example, on just the ADA, on the American Disability Act, and getting into a building. There are a lot of buildings that still have stairs and still have stairs that people can't get into. The Capitol, where you advocate for yourself and for others, still has hard doors, or have doors that you can't, people who uses wheelchairs can't get into.
Can you describe yourself for our listeners?
Yes, I'm a short white woman with white bluish glasses. I have black hair, and I have a black polka dot blue, blackish bluish polka dot shirt, short sleeve shirt.
You described that shirt better than I could, but keeping with your philosophy, I would describe myself as a 16-year-old Caucasian male. I am almost 6 feet tall, and I have brown hair and brown eyes. When you spoke before the Senate at the Brett Kavanaugh hearing, you spoke on behalf of all people with disabilities, especially on behalf of cognitive ones. Again, all means all. You mentioned your youth and how your parents did what they thought was best. Can you share your memories of your earliest years and how your parents tried to help you, even if it wasn't the best thing for you?
Yes, and thank you for talking about my parents. My parents are why I'm here, and my parents are no longer here, but to me, they'll always be in my heart, and they'll always be here.
God bless.
As I said, they're the reason why I'm here. My parents were, I don't remember this, but I was told by my father, that when I was, by the time I was probably a year and a half, I wasn't doing the same kind of things that my sisters did, like walking and talking and those kinds of things. So my parents brought me to a doctor in Philadelphia, because at that time we were living in New Jersey and we had some connection to Philadelphia. So so they brought me to a doctor in Philadelphia, where the doctor said, put her in an institution. It would be the best thing for you and your family. And my father thought about it. At that time, he had 2 jobs, a newspaper in the Washington area where I live now, and in New Jersey, where I was living at that time. And he thought about it because it was the easiest thing for him, and maybe would be the best thing for the family. I had 3 older sisters, and at that time under the age of 10. So, and you can see, maybe it would be the best thing. And my mother said, nothing doing. I'll keep her at home and I'll work with her. And they brought me to another doctor for a second opinion. And that doctor said, I just had disabilities, and I should be kept at home. And that's what they did. They kept me at home. I did go to a special school till probably grade 2, grade, second grade, and then third grade, the first, my first year in school, and then second year I went to I was in a self-contained class where.
Sorry, what type of class?
A self-contained
Self-contained,
class,
okay.
a special classroom where there was kids with language issues. I have some speech issues. That's part of my disability. And but I went to a regular school, and then I got tired of that, and I asked if I could be moved to a regular school, and my parents did that. I went to a regular school just like anyone else, till I was in 11th grade. And it was, it got hard around 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade, because people picked on me. People said, call me names. The names that I would imagine that you might have heard of or might experience. I won't share those names here unless you would like me. So when I went to I came home every night complaining to my parents and complaining and yelling, and then yelling at the dinner table. I didn't know how else to share it. And I said that I was very unhappy because people picked on me. I remember one time I was coming out off of the bus where people called me the MR word. And I said to my, I came home crying to my parents and saying, my mother, and saying, the kids are calling me MR, and do I have that? And my mother said, no, you do not. And I can remember that. No, you do not. And I said, Mom, come on, tell me the truth, because obviously the kids are calling me that. And she finally said, yes, you do, but we don't like to call that MR. And so that is an example of how my parents treat me like I have a learning disability. And then by 11th grade, the middle of 11th grade, I got tired of that. So I went to a career center because I couldn't get into a boarding school, because I really needed to leave the school system. It was really important to me that I needed to leave. Not because I was not learning something, but for my emotional well-being, I was miserable, and so I went to my senior year in high school, and then a postgraduate year, I went to a boarding school in Cape Cod, which was a segregated school. And you might think, and it was the best school of my life. And you might be saying, well, why? Why? I'm this pro inclusion person. I talk about inclusion all the time. But it was where I finally fit in. I had friends, and to this day, I still have some of my best friends. Well, I wouldn't say best friends. Some of my friends were people that I went to school with. So that's a little bit about my education.
I really love the story. I want to move to how you became an advocate for those with different abilities.
Well, once I learned how to advocate for myself, I thought, well, why should it just be for me? I can't just be for me. I need to advocate for my friends. I need to advocate for people, for other people. Shame on me if it is just for me.
I totally get that because I sometimes feel that there are people that I know that don't have the same opportunities that I have had, and I want to change that sometimes. Do you ever have that feeling?
Yes, yes, I do. I and that's how I help people. I'll give you an example about that, and you might relate to this as a student yourself. One of the things that I work on is on Think College, helping people to advocate for themselves. And they're college students just like anyone else, and they go to a program called the TEPSIT program. There's a program in I think 30 states. I'm not sure the number off on my head. But they go to school just like anyone else, go to college. And I'm helping them learn how to speak up for themselves.
Wow, I'm so happy to hear that people are speaking up for themselves, and I'm so happy to hear that you're taking a part in helping people do that.
Thank you.
So I want to move on to the ADA. One thing I noticed is that there's so many videos on your show about the ADA, and as someone who doesn't have a physical disability, I was taken aback by this. So I'm wondering how the ADA affected people like you and me.
That's a great question. The ADA, and it's 30,
32?
In July it will be 33 years old, which is very exciting. And I'll start by telling you some background information about how it became a law, or how it became a reality. In 1965, before I was born, there was an act called the Civil Rights Act for people who are African Americans. They in 1990 or 19.
It was in 1990, I believe, is when it was passed.
Yeah, but in 1918, in the late 80s, they realized that hey, they forgot one group.
The people like us.
Yeah, people with disabilities, and to include in that act. So in 1990, in the 80s, I think they started it in there in the sub in 74. That way back then there was some action about education and people getting these special supports in for education. And so in 1980, they started to work on the ADA. Because there were people that wanted to advocate. They wanted to advocate to the in the to
Advocate for themselves?
yeah, advocate for themselves and advocate at the Capitol, the U.S. Capitol, and they couldn't get into, so people crawled up the steps to
Oh,
the
wow.
Capitol. Yeah. And you should look up Capitol Crawl. I think they just had
That's a big building. That's a real big building. The hill is
Yeah.
real big. The amount of passion they had in what they were doing to help people, that's crazy.
That's what you do as an advocate. You're passionate
Yeah.
about
You have to
your
be.
passion. Yeah. And you don't take no for an answer. You can't take no for an answer. That's the number one rule. You cannot not take no for an answer. And so there was a guy named Justin Dart, and he went around to and he had polio, and he had so he went around to every state to talk about why the ADA was so important to pass. And Senator Harkins, who's a retired senator from Iowa, Senator Harkins, you should look him up. And I think his brother is dead, but he had the brother, who was deaf. I think the brother died, but I'm not sure. And he and others, he and Senator Dole, who just died, passed the ADA, the American Disability Act, in 1990.
1990 flat.
Yeah, 1990. You're right.
So Tom Harkin passed the ADA. That's pretty cool. And
Well, there were others, but he helped write the
right.
Yeah, with Senator Dole too.
I don't know how the bill writing works, but I would assume you have to know how they do that as part of your job. How the litigation works and the bureaucracy.
Yes.
And I'm wondering about something else. How it affected. Did you mention how the ADA affected education in America?
Well, the ADA has some to do with education, but more so, the IDEA has a lot to do with education. The IDEA,
Intellectual Disability Act?
No, the Individual Disability Education Act. It was
IDEA.
Yeah, IDEA.
Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Yep.
Yeah. And so anyway, that's saying that people with disability have the right to get an education just like anyone else.
Wow. I think that's like a basic right that we should have. Why did it take so long for it to come up in our laws?
Well, I think it's about discrimination. I think that people think that people with disability should be put in a corner and not people think that we should not be heard. People think that we should be placed in an institution.
And I want to know how you started hosting Tuesdays with Liz.
Okay. It began it began sitting around the dinner table. My family always included me. They tried their best to include me from day one. And so, and all the discussion was about policy, or I should say most of the discussion, the dinner table was about policy. And because my father was an editor-turned-publisher for a local newspaper, so therefore that's what our family was interested in. Maybe that's boring, and maybe that's different, but that's who my family is, and that's who I love. So I kept on saying, well, what did this? What did that? What did this? What did that? And my parents kept on saying, look it up, look it up, look it up. And that doesn't work for me. I don't know whether it works for you, but that doesn't work for me. I need someone I need to listen to people. I need to have people talk to me about things. And so when I had the chance at AUCD, the Association for University Centers and Disability, where I work, to make a video, I asked my bosses, actually my boss who's no longer there, if I could do like a video, like Tuesdays with Liz, and that's how it began. And it's been around for, I have done over 200 episodes.
Over 8 years, I'd say?
Probably 8 years.
Probably about, yeah. That show must be therapeutic for you, based on...
Yeah.
Because you mentioned looking things up didn't work for you, so that had to be therapeutic for you to find out things.
So, for example, I'll tell you about home community-based services.
Home community-based services?
Yes.
Okay.
And that's a bill that Senator Casey from Pennsylvania.
Senator Casey. Yep, I'm just clarifying.
Yeah, Senator Casey proposed, and it's so I talked to him about that bill, and what that bill would do is help people live in the community and get the services that they want and they deserve. Another bill that I talk about is Transformative Competitive Integrated Employment Act.
Transformative, competitive, and What employment? Integrated employment.
Yeah, and that's Senator Casey and Senator Casey on the Democratic side and Senator Daines on the Republican side, and that's what we call bipartisan because they're two parties. And so what that would be in the 50s, going back a long time ago, probably 40s, 50s, people with disability were allowed to be paid sub-minimum wage. Employers were allowed to pay people with disabilities less than minimum wage. And they still do that. In some states, it's still, you're allowed to pay people less than minimum wage. And that's not right. And that's not fair. And so, so there's a act in Congress, and as I said, Senator Daines and Senator Casey introduced that earlier this fall, which we're very excited about, and we're hoping that it will pass. We're not sure.
So it's the RISE Act?
No, that's another act. But
Casey and Daines introduced bipartisan bill to phase out sub-minimum wage. Wait, so there are, oh my God, so I just saw, and according to Casey's website, an estimated 100,000 people with disabilities are paid less than $7.25 an hour, which would be illegal for someone like the guy on my left, who's, shout out to him for making this radio show possible, Mr. Michael Frank. Thank you so much.
But he's allowed. He would be allowed. I doubt Mr. Frank would do this because
he wouldn't, because he's literally hosting this radio show.
He would not do this, but it still is. And I don't know where you're from. What state are you from?
We're in Sleepy Hollow, New York right now.
Okay, Sleepy.
You know the legend of Sleepy Hollow? That's where we are.
Okay. Okay.
You're on Sleepy Hollow Radio.
That's cool. I think your cousin passed, and don't quote me, I don't think it has passed the transformative. Some states have already passed this on the state legislative side. Like in Maryland, where I live, they have already passed this act.
New York is actually a bit behind, I believe, in some areas, especially compared to states like Massachusetts.
Yeah.
But New York is a lot better than a lot of other states, but I mean, it's not the worst. But there are some things in New York that are kinda not that cool for me, and I mean, but I love being here. I love being near New York City, and it's such a wonderful resource, and I hope I can utilize it later in my life, because that's very helpful. There was one time you had a webinar online. I was listening to all your interviews on a playlist while I was, like, playing a game, because I was studying. I was, like, multitasking. Don't get offended by it. And I heard, all of a sudden, there's this webinar that comes up, and it's basically stuff about how the government works. I'm like, why are we talking about this on your show, this webinar? You had this webinar with the AUCD about how the government works. You're talking about how to have the accessibility and like the 3 branches and stuff. Why are you talking about this now in a webinar?
Because people need to know how the government works. People need to. It's our government. We, the capital is called the People's House.
Right.
It's our house. We need to be there. It's our house.
I totally agree. But I want to go back to employment because you mentioned employment, and I want to talk about something about inclusive businesses that, or sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't, but this one I know is. It's in our town, a retired teacher, Miss Kimberly Kasmerick, is offering a coffee house called Sleepy Coffee 2 and will employ people of varying abilities. And I believe and know she will be respectful and play her employees fairly. And the idea of the shop started as a training program in our school and now has an official brick and mortar location in downtown Sleepy Hollow. I believe it's going to be on Beekman Avenue. I'm not exactly sure. But I know that the local community enthusiastically supports her efforts and they will frequent it when it opens. My question for you is, are you seeing more inclusive businesses now than in the past?
Yeah, I think so. I think that people are at a level of doing more businesses. People are doing more micro enterprises. People are owning their own businesses. I don't know very much about that, but other people do.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have to do more research on it too. Before we close, I have a few quick questions to ask. I'm really enjoying talking to you, and I'll probably keep in touch with you after this interview. How can you make a radio show like this more accessible to those with visual or hearing impairments?
By captioning, like
Yeah.
at AUCD at Tuesdays with Liz, we have captioning, and that's why I need a producer. Right now, we're on a break, because we need to find another producer.
Stenographer?
A producer.
Oh.
But I think that's a way to make it accessible. Another way is to have a person with a disability, a person with an intellectual disability to host the show, so the words can be at our level, so those are the 2 ideas I have.
Right. I also would like to mention that there is an archive videos on YouTube. If you go on YouTube, you can auto-generate subtitles after the shows are archived and finished airing on the radio. There may be a bit of a delay, but I believe, I'm not sure about this, but I believe you can get the links on the radio website, sleepyhollowradio.com, and you can get the YouTube link, and when it's done being archived and done making its rounds, and you can listen to it with subtitles. Because radio is one of the least accessible forms of broadcasting when you think about it. And it's kind of ironic that we have a show about different abilities on that medium, but it works out for some reason. It actually works out. As a student in a public school setting, I am involved in initiatives to bring awareness about different student abilities to my peers and staff. What do you think makes a school most helpful and fair for students with different learning and social abilities?
If I understand how to make if I understand the question,
How can the school make it inclusive? How can a school become more inclusive? Let's go with that.
okay, how, I think to just include people with disability, to give us a chance, let us belong in, let us belong to the schools. I heard, through Think College, I have heard people are joining clubs, joining fraternities. Um, let the reason why I left and went to a boarding school, a school for people with disability, was because I wasn't included in
Yeah,
in the classroom.
I totally get it.
Yes, I might get a A on a paper or B on a, in the class, but if I don't have friends, that's not.
I'm the
I'm
same.
not
I'm
good.
exactly the same as you. I am completely the same as you. I get good grades, and then after school, I'm alone a lot of times. But I am working on that, and I'm so happy to have a supportive family, and that's helpful for me.
Yeah.
How did you manage to get in touch with President Obama, and how did you manage to get onto his board, his committee?
Um, and actually, I'm on President Biden's.
Oh, I had no idea. That's so
Yeah.
cool. That's so cool. How'd you manage to get on Biden and Obama's committee?
I think it's you need to be active. I've been doing advocacy for the last probably 20 years, and people know who I am. My name is there. Out there, I don't. I have done a lot in my 20 years of advocacy, whether it's for myself or whether it's for others. So therefore, they thought about people who would be good to be on this committee.
Wow, that's so cool that you managed to get that spot. I can't believe it. And it's
Maybe.
amazing that we have someone like you on here today. And I'm going to go back to the question. Can you talk to my audience right now and share with them how they can make a difference in the lives of people with different abilities?
How you can make a difference is just be yourself and just advocate for a friend. Advocate to make sure that how I did it was I saw something in my community, in my world, in my in school, whatever.
Wow.
And I wanted to make a difference. Talking about schools, there's a vending machine, and if you can't access the vending machine because you use a wheelchair, that's wrong. So advocate for that. If you can't open the door, that door I see behind you, advocate for that. And actually, when I was at the Senate working for Senator Casey, the doors were really high. I mean, hard to push. The doors, that door behind you, maybe that. So those kinds of doors, the office, so the office door where I worked for Senator Casey was really hard to push, and so me and my supervisor wrote a letter to the architect board or committee in the Senate, and guess what? The next time I knew, they fixed that door.
Wow. That's amazing. I hate to have to end it now, but I would love to thank you again for being my guest today, and you were amazing and a joy to talk to. And you were an exceptional role model for everyone, and you define an advocate, even though you were a bit unsure of yourself about being an advocate. I think you are an advocate, and I think you're an amazing at it, even if you say you weren't, but I think you are.
I want to clarify it. I know that I'm an advocate, but when you say I'm an amazing advocate, that's where I don't want, because I think you're amazing. I think anyone is amazing.
Okay.
Why am I so special? Yes, I've done a lot.
Because you're on the show. You're so special because you're on the show. I think that's why, but you're right. You're right.
You.
I actually don't think about it like that, and I think I should. And yep, I completely didn't understand that. So you were an exceptional role model for everyone, and you have proven that the sky's the limit to the success that you can achieve, and I'd like to thank you. You're listening to SleepyHollowRadio.com. Now back to the music.
Thank you. Always believe in yourself.